Palace of Versailles stands as one of the most magnificent symbols of royal opulence in history. Located just outside Paris, this architectural masterpiece was once the epicenter of French power, politics, and prestige. Today, millions visit Versailles each year to witness its golden halls, grand gardens, and the aura of a monarchy that once ruled Europe with unmatched splendor. But Versailles wasn't always a palace. It began as a modest hunting lodge in the early 17th century, far removed from the lavish symbol we know today. Through the ambitions of one man, King Louis XIV, the Sun King Versailles was transformed into the grandest royal residence the world had ever seen. In this video, we'll explore Versailles' rise from humble beginnings to a symbol of absolute monarchy. We'll uncover the stories behind its architecture, its breathtaking gardens, and the lives of the royals who called it home. We'll also look at how Versailles played a role in shaping French culture, and even how it became a key stage for revolution. So, let's step back in time to explore how the Palace of Versailles became not just a residence, but a legend, before it became a symbol of power. Versailles was little more than a small estate surrounded by forests and marshes. In 1623, King Louis XIII, father of Louis XIV, ordered the construction of a simple hunting lodge. The location was chosen because it was rich in game and conveniently located near Paris, yet secluded enough for privacy. Louis XIII's lodge was modest, a two-story brick and stone building, far from the grandeur it would later achieve. However, it quickly became one of his favorite retreats. Over time, he acquired more land, expanding the estate to include small gardens and a few additional structures. But the real transformation began under his son, Louis XIV. When the young king visited Versailles, he saw more than just a hunting spot. He saw potential. He envisioned a palace that would reflect his divine right to rule, his wealth, and his absolute authority over France. By 1661, work began to expand Versailles into a royal residence fit for the Sun King. Architects Louis Lavoie and later Jules Hardouin-Mansart, along with landscape designer André Lenêtre, would turn this modest lodge into the most celebrated palace in Europe. The transformation had begun, and so had the making of a symbol that would define an era. Louis XIV wasn't just a king, he was a visionary who believed that monarchy should embody divine power. Known as the Sun King, he saw himself as the center of the universe, much like the sun itself. For him, Versailles was not merely a home, it was a manifestation of his rule, a stage upon which his power could shine. When construction on Versailles accelerated in the 1660s, Louis XIV was already consolidating control over the nobility and the state. The palace became his most effective political tool. By inviting nobles to live at Versailles, he kept them close, entertaining, flattering, and subtly controlling them. Life at court revolved entirely around the king. Every aspect of the palace reinforced this message of absolute power. From the layout of the gardens radiating outward like sunbeams to the endless mirrors reflecting light, everything symbolized Louis XIV's glory. In 1682, Louis XIV officially moved the royal court and government to Versailles, making it the political heart of France. The message was clear. The power of France radiated not from Paris, but from the Sun King himself. Versailles became more than a palace, it became a living symbol of authority, beauty, and control. The splendor of Versailles was no accident. It was a carefully orchestrated masterpiece. The architects and artists who shaped it were among the finest minds of their era. Louis Lavoie laid the foundation, designing the first major expansions. After his death, Jules Hardouin-Mansart took over, adding the palace's most iconic features, including the Hall of Mirrors. Charles Le Brun, the chief painter and decorator, infused the interiors with mythological symbolism. Every ceiling, wall, and corridor told a story of the Sun King's divine right and military victories. The use of classical themes wasn't just artistic, it was political. The gods of Olympus became metaphors for royal authority. The architecture blended classical harmony with Baroque drama, Grand facades, symmetrical courtyards, and lavish decorations created a sense of endless space and light. The use of mirrors, windows, and gilded details made the palace sparkle literally and symbolically. By the late 17th century, Versailles had become a model for royal architecture across Europe. Monarchs from Austria to Russia would imitate its style, hoping to capture a fragment of France's grandeur. Versailles had set a new global standard for royal magnificence. The gardens of Versailles are as legendary as the palace itself. Designed by landscape architect André Linray, they cover nearly 2,000 acres of meticulously arranged lawns, fountains, statues, and groves. Linray's genius lay in turning nature into geometry, a perfect expression of Louis Chiev's control over the natural and human world. Creating the gardens was a colossal effort. Thousands of laborers, soldiers, and artists worked for decades to shape the terrain, dig canals, and plant trees. Some of the trees were brought from as far as Norway. Every path, pond, and perspective was designed to lead the eye back toward the palace. Reinforcing the king's central role in the universe, the fountains were technological marvels of their time. With over 50 elaborate water displays, the gardens became a stage for royal spectacles. During festivals, the fountains danced to music, and fireworks illuminated the night sky. The gardens were not just for beauty, they were a symbol of domination. Nature itself had been conquered and ordered by royal decree. Even today, the gardens of Versailles remain a masterpiece of landscape design and one of the most visited sites in France. Daily life at Versailles was a theater of power. Every action, from waking to sleeping, followed a strict ritual that revolved around the king. The lever, or royal awakening, was a ceremony where courtiers competed for the honor of helping the king dress. Even dining and walking were public events, watched by nobles eager to gain favor. This system of etiquette was designed by Louis XIV himself. It ensured that the nobility, who might otherwise plot rebellion, were too busy seeking royal attention to cause trouble. Rank and privilege were defined by proximity to the king. Versailles also hosted grand balls, operas, and banquets that showcased the wealth of France. These events dazzled visitors and reinforced the idea of Louis XIV's divine authority. For many nobles, Versailles was both a dream and a prison. They lived surrounded by luxury, but under constant pressure to conform and please the king. In this golden cage, Louis XIV maintained total control over his realm, not through force, but through splendor. Few rooms in the world inspire awe like the Hall of Mirrors or Gallery des Glaces. Completed in 1684, it became the dazzling heart of Versailles. Stretching over 70 meters, this corridor of glass and gold connected the king's and queen's apartments, symbolizing the unity and magnificence of the monarchy. Designed by architect Jules Hardouin-Mansart and decorated by Charles Lebrun, the Hall of Mirrors was a revolutionary masterpiece. 17 huge mirrors faced 17 arched windows overlooking the gardens, reflecting sunlight in a dazzling display that epitomized Louis XIV's image as the Sun King. At a time when mirrors were extremely expensive, having so many in one place was a statement of unimaginable wealth. Every inch of the hall glorified the king's achievements. The ceiling frescoes depicted his military victories, triumphs over foreign powers, and his supposed divine connection to Apollo, the god of the sun. The Hall of Mirrors wasn't just decorative, it was a political theater. Foreign ambassadors were received here, treaties were signed, and royal ceremonies unfolded beneath the glittering chandeliers. Centuries later, in 1919, the Treaty of Versailles would be signed in this very room, ending World War I in that moment. The hall became not only a symbol of royal power, but also of world history. It remains one of the most iconic rooms ever built, a space where art, politics, and power meet in breathtaking harmony. Behind the grandeur of Versailles lay personal stories, none more fascinating than those of the queens who lived there. The queen's apartments mirrored the king's, but they reflected feminine grace rather than political might. Marie Therese of Austria, Louis XIV's wife, was the first to inhabit them. Later, Marie Lacheska and the famous Marie Antoinette would leave their marks, each redesigning the rooms to fit her taste. Marie Antoinette, in particular, sought refuge from the rigid life of court. While Versailles demanded endless ceremony, she longed for privacy and simplicity. She commissioned the Petit Trianon, a smaller palace within the estate, where she could escape formal duties. There, she created a miniature rustic village called the Hameau de la Reine-Combe, complete with cottages, gardens, and a dairy where she and her friends played at being shepherdesses. But her pursuit of simplicity was misunderstood by the public. As France's economic struggles grew, her indulgences became symbols of royal excess. Let them eat cake, though falsely attributed to her, captured the growing resentment. Within the Queen's apartments, visitors can still feel both splendor and confinement, the beauty of gold and silk, and the loneliness of a woman trapped by the crown. Versailles' elegance was magnificent, but for its queens. It could also be suffocating. Behind the glittering facade of Versailles worked a small army of servants, artisans, and cooks who made royal life possible. At its height, the palace housed over 10,000 people, courtiers, guards, musicians, maids, and laborers. Feeding the royal family and guests required extraordinary organization. The palace kitchens were vast, filled with copper pots, fresh produce, and fine wines from across France. Meals for the king could include dozens of dishes, roasted meats, pastries, soups, and fruits served in precise order. Each course reflected the sophistication of the French court, influencing culinary traditions worldwide. Many modern fine dining customs trace their origins back to Versailles. Yet for the thousands who toiled behind the scenes, life was far from luxurious. Servants lived in cramped quarters, working long hours to maintain the illusion of effortless splendor. Some never even saw the king they served. Even the palace's famous fountains required hundreds of workers to operate manually. During grand events, valves were turned on and off in sequence to conserve water while giving the illusion that everything flowed continuously. This invisible workforce was the heartbeat of Versailles, a reminder that beneath the gold and glory was a human machine powered by labor, hierarchy, and devotion to the crown. Versailles was not just a political capital. It was the cultural capital of Europe. Under Louis XIV, art became propaganda way to glorify the monarchy and shape public imagination. The king was an enthusiastic patron of music and dance. In fact, he was a skilled dancer himself, famously performing as Apollo, the sun god, in elaborate ballets. This passion gave rise to French Baroque music, with composers like Jean-Baptiste Lully creating works that filled the royal halls with grandeur. The palace featured its own royal opera house. Inaugurated in 1774, the marriage of the future Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. The theater was a marvel of acoustics and engineering, adorned with marble, gold, and mirrors that reflected the candlelight like stars. Painters, sculptors, and architects thrived under royal patronage. The Académie Royale des Beaux-Arts, based in Versailles, set artistic standards for generations. Every performance, painting, and sculpture carried political meaning. They depicted the king as a heroic figure, France as the center of civilization, Versailles as the pinnacle of human achievement. Art was not merely decoration, it was an instrument of power. Through beauty, Louis XIV made sure that even culture itself bowed to his will. Versailles wasn't just a palace, it was a diplomatic weapon. Foreign ambassadors, kings, and princes who visited were overwhelmed by its splendor. Every mirror, marble column, and banquet was a message. France was the most powerful nation on earth. Louis XIV's rule extended far beyond architecture. His wars, alliances, and displays of grandeur all stemmed from the belief that France should dominate Europe. Versailles became the stage upon which this political theater played out. Ambassadors would wait days for an audience with the king, witnessing ceremonies designed to emphasize hierarchy and control. Everything from the king's attire to the throne room's layout was meant to intimidate and impress. Even after Louis XIV's death, Versailles continued to influence European diplomacy. It was here that treaties were negotiated, royal marriages arranged, and alliances forged. The palace was a living representation of absolutism, a government in which all power rested in the hands of one ruler. Monarchs across Europe, from Peter the Great of Russia to Frederick the Great of Prussia, sought to emulate Versailles' model of royal authority. Through Versailles, France not only led in art and fashion, it led in politics and ideology. By the late 18th century, Versailles' golden glow began to fade. The extravagance that once symbolized France's greatness became a symbol of excess and disconnect. While the royal family lived in unimaginable luxury, ordinary citizens faced hunger, debt, and inequality. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette inherited a crumbling financial system, burdened by wars and royal spending. Attempts at reform failed, and resentment grew. The lavish banquets, the jewels, the endless ceremonies, all became proof of royal indifference. As revolutionary ideas spread, Versailles became a target of anger. The same palace that once represented divine right now symbolized tyranny. In October 1789, a mob of thousands, many of them women, marched from Paris to Versailles demanding bread and justice. They stormed the palace, forcing the royal family to return to Paris as virtual prisoners. That march marked the end of Versailles as the seat of power. The monarchy's golden dream had turned into a nightmare. Versailles, once the center of the world, was abandoned, its halls silent, its mirrors reflecting the ghosts of a fallen age. After the French Revolution, Versailles faced chaos and transformation. The furniture was sold, art was removed, and the palace was stripped of its former glory. For decades, it stood as a haunting reminder of monarchy's collapse. During the Napoleonic era, parts of the estate were used for government offices and military purposes. Napoleon admired Versailles but preferred to establish his own symbols of power. In the 19th century, however, Versailles found a new role. King Louis Philippe, who ruled from 1830 to 1848, decided to preserve it as a museum of French history. He famously declared that it would be dedicated to all the glories of France. This transformation saved the palace from ruin. Rooms once reserved for royalty now displayed portraits, battle scenes, and sculptures celebrating French heroes. Versailles became a national monument rather than a royal residence. It was also the site of major political events. In 1871, after France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, the German Empire was proclaimed in the Hall of Mirrors. Nearly 50 years later, the Treaty of Versailles was signed there. Ending World War I, Versailles had evolved from a symbol of monarchy to a stage for modern history. By the 20th century, Versailles faced decay. Its vast size, delicate decorations, and centuries of wear demanded constant restoration. Thanks to historians, architects, and international donations, a massive preservation effort began. During World War II, priceless artworks were removed and hidden to protect them from bombing. After the war, restoration projects resumed, funded by both the French government and private foundations. In the 1950s and beyond, experts worked tirelessly to restore faded paintings, repair gilded moldings, and reconstruct historical rooms.